increased to 1,863 from 825 the year before, but admissions to diploma programs also increased from 2,146 in 2000 to 2,578 in 2001, CNA/CASN, 2004. While these increases might seem contradictory in light of the Ontario College of Nurses edict, they may not be. The increase in baccalaureate enrollments reflects the start of collaborative programs. Students who would previously have entered diploma programs now had access to degree programs. The increase in diploma admissions may be explained by the phenomenon of students taking advantage of the last year to enter a 3-year program to become a registered nurse. So those who had been contemplating it could not put it off any longer, and so enrolled. Enrollment trends. The response rate to the survey conducted for this report, 57%, is too low to draw conclusions about enrollment trends beyond 2001. Furthermore, the 2001 data include only admission to degree programs in Ontario, not diploma. However, the 2002 and 2003 data show that for schools that responded, 66 in 2002 and 65 in 2003, admissions went from 5,425 to 7,600. Slightly more schools were above their enrollment targets than were below. The majority of schools do not plan to increase the number of students they admit in 2004. Those that do plan increases are offset almost exactly by schools that plan to decrease enrollments. If these responding schools are even somewhat representative of Canadian schools, then continued increases in admissions have occurred in 2002 and 2003. However, this trend may be starting to plateau, owing to a lack of resources, discussed in detail elsewhere in this report. The CNA/CASN report of enrollment data in Canadian schools of nursing provides information about the trends in total enrollments from 1997 to 2001. These are reported in Table 27. Table 27. Enrollment in diploma and baccalaureate schools of nursing 1997 to 2001. Year diploma schools, baccalaureate schools, total 1997 15,739,581 25,311 1998 13,171 8,855 22,026 1999 11,609 10,270 21,800 79 2000 11,248 10,264 21,512 2001 15,788 17,533,288 Source. All data are from the National and Faculty Survey of Canadian Schools of Nursing 2001 to 2002, CNA/CASN, 2004. The data reported present some confusion. In Table 27, the 2001 enrollment data seem high for baccalaureate programs, since the total of 17,500 is greater than the total of 16,810 admissions from 1998 to 2001 as reported in Table 26. On the other hand, Table 27 shows reductions in enrollment experienced by RN nursing schools in the later 1990s, which reflect the reductions in applications and admissions through the mid-1990s. A total of 66 schools provided enrollment data to the current survey, showing that 20,634 students enrolled in 2003. Given that 66 schools represent only 51.5% of all Canadian nursing schools, we can deduct that a trend that started with increasing admissions in 1999 is continuing. However, it is not possible with these low response rates to determine to what extent enrollments have increased since 2001. 6.1.2 Retention Rate. Admissions and total enrollments tell only part of the story of the capacity of Canadian schools. Retention of admitted students until their graduation is critical to ensuring a sufficient supply of nurses. Building the Future, an integrated strategy for nursing human resources, page 63. Nursing education in Canada, historical review and current capacity. enters the workforce. The retention rates revealed in this study were unsettling. While there are no national standards for retention, it is unlikely that rates as low as 22% or 33% are acceptable. Even the median of 74% seems too low. A third of students that started nursing programs in 1998 had not graduated by 2003. The students entering in 1999 fared even more poorly. Only 61% of them had finished by 2003. Even given that more students within both of these groups are likely to finish, the completion rates are disturbingly low. Comparisons were made with the CNA/CASN data. The proportions of students who entered diploma programs in 1997 and 1998 were compared with graduating numbers in 2000 and 2001, respectively. The completion rates were 63% and 47.8%, respectively. A similar numbers comparison of students entering baccalaureate programs in 1997 and students graduating in 2001 revealed a completion rate of 80%. These are only course comparisons, meaning that more students from all these entering classes will graduate than is reflected in these numbers. The limitations in the available CNA/CASN data made it necessary to calculate completion rates for classes exactly 3 years, for diploma, and 4 years, for baccalaureate, after starting, which does not provide for withdrawals and re-entry of students who subsequently complete. On the other hand, this approach includes students who entered prior to the designated entry year, but who did not/will not graduate until the designated completion year. Reasons for withdrawal. Students withdraw from nursing programs for a number of reasons, the most common being academic difficulty, family responsibilities, financial difficulty, wrong choice of career, and illness. Boland and Granger, 2003, Glossop, 2001, Jaleel Granier, 1993, Pringle, 2004, Smith, V.A., 1990. Less common reasons include transfer of a spouse to another location, Glossop, 2001, work responsibilities and childcare needs, Aber and Arathuzik, 1996, and academic-related attributes such as poor study skills and habits, fewer hours allocated to study per week, lower grade point average, and perceptions of faculty and friends in the program. Jeffries, 2002, Liegler, 1997, Tinto, 1997. A number of researchers have identified that non-traditional students, defined by Jeffries as those with one or more of the following attributes, 25 years of age or older, with dependent children, English as their second language, a member of an ethnic minority, or male gender, have a higher risk of withdrawal than traditional students. Jeffries, 2002, Lockie and Burke, 1999, Memmer, 1991. In a recently completed study on attrition that involved 6 large university programs from across Canada, students who withdrew identified the top 4 reasons for leaving as follows: faculty were not supportive, lack of financial resources, the chaos in nursing, and the perception that one could not have a good career as a nurse. Pringle, 2004. In this same study, students entering with high school averages that were lower than the mean entering average had statistically significantly higher attrition rates than those entering with high school averages at or above the mean. Pringle, 2004. This confirms findings from a study conducted in one Canadian school that found positive correlations between high school and nursing school grades. Boland and Granger, 2003. Improved current retention. The good news coming from the current survey data is that many schools have admirable retention rates of 100%, 98%, and 95%, and the mean completion rate of 80% for baccalaureate schools participating in the CNA/CASN study is much better than that for diploma schools. Therefore, the move to baccalaureate education as entry to practice may have an ameliorating effect on attrition, but with some caveats. One of the reasons that baccalaureate programs may have lower attrition rates is that students compete for admission based on their academic records. A higher proportion of academically able students may enter baccalaureate programs than diploma programs because of admission criteria. This is not true for many diploma programs because the mandate of many colleges is Building the Future, an integrated strategy for nursing human resources, page 64. Nursing education in Canada, historical review and current capacity. To not discriminate on the basis of previous academic performance, but to admit on a first-come basis. This probably puts more students at risk of academic difficulty, and hence, failure or withdrawal because of stress due to academic pressure. If an academically marginal student runs into a stressful family situation, she or he has less capacity to work through it than a student who is more academically able. For example, a student who is doing well but is struck with a family crisis can afford to not study for a couple of weeks and still catch up, whereas a less able student may not be able to do that. Importance of family support. One of the strongest findings in the Pringle, 2004 study of attrition in Canadian baccalaureate programs was the students' need for support from faculty members and for program expectations to be perceived as relevant by students. Support means faculty members need to closely monitor the performance of students and to seek out and offer support to students who give any indication of stress or academic struggle. This requires resources. A second important finding was the necessity to portray nursing realistically to potential students, so they are not caught off guard when they encounter the following: highly stressed and unsupportive staff nurses, media that challenges the effectiveness of the system, environments that do not have the equipment required by nurses to fulfill their responsibilities, or staffing that is so short that essential patient care activities are missed. 6.1.3 Resources to support capacity. One of the major, if not the major, driving forces behind admission rates, and a significant contributor to retention of students, is the resources available to RN schools of nursing. The responses to the survey, across most resource categories, indicate that at least half the programs are struggling to manage the current number of students, across most resource categories. There are only 4 areas in which most programs have sufficient resources: numbers of applications for the number of places/seats they can fill, staff to coordinate student sections for clinical placements in long-term care, and computer and technical support for students. In contrast, most schools have insufficient numbers of clinical teachers, too few community placements and acute care placements, too few preceptors, insufficient financial support for students, and not enough backup teachers to fill in for teachers who are ill or unable to fulfill her/his responsibilities. These are critical resource areas for any program. In light of these answers, it is not surprising that most schools indicated that they are not planning to expand their admissions in 2004. Clinical teachers, preceptors, and acute care and community placements are the core of nursing education programs. When schools are short of these resources, they have a difficult time meeting their responsibilities to students. The fact that more than half of the respondents to this survey indicated that they have insufficient resources in these areas should raise alarms across the nursing community. Complicating the picture is the fact that these types of resources cannot easily be found. Most schools reported competing for placements with more than one other type of program. Most schools also reported that they are using non-traditional agencies and experiences to offset the lack of traditional visiting nursing and acute care hospital opportunities. 6.1.3.a Availability of teachers. Other areas that are less visible but are nonetheless critical to the stability of programs are the availability of classroom teachers and the capacity to mentor new teachers. Programs will find teachers for classrooms because they must. However, these teachers may not have expertise in the subject of the course, or they rotated through to cover various topics but with no stability, leaving students with few or no experts to help them if they are having difficulty. Pringle, 2004. Furthermore, programs that are short. Building the Future, an integrated strategy for nursing human resources, page 65. Nursing education in Canada, historical review, and current capacity. Of teachers may have to expand class sizes, with the result that students have little opportunity to ask questions or to seek guidance from a teacher who is spread too thin. Mentoring new teachers is a good long-term investment in creating an effective and stable teaching staff. The schools provided information about their need and ability regarding hiring new teachers. Most schools, 77%, had vacancies they were trying to fill in all three categories of positions: full-time tenured/permanent, full-time limited-term contract, and part-time contract. Amazingly, most were able to fill the majority of these positions to their satisfaction in terms of getting people with the qualifications they were seeking. The category that proved to be most difficult to fill was that of full-time tenured or permanent. This was the category with the highest expectations regarding preparation, with over 40% of schools seeking people with a completed PhD in either nursing or a relevant area, or a PhD plus postdoctoral experience. Few sought the latter. The need for postdoctoral experience is likely to increase in university schools in order to make new tenure stream faculty members competitive for research grants, which are essential to their ability to be tenured. About 70% of schools were successful in filling these positions, and 86% described themselves as either partially or completely successful in filling the positions. This is reasonably good given the market and the number of positions available. The CNA/CASN Report 2004 provides information about the number and preparation of faculty members in Canadian schools. The 2001 data, which does not include responses from 1 BC college, 15 Quebec Cégep schools, and 2 Quebec universities, indicate that there were 4,279 faculty members, of which 445 had a completed PhD, and another 39 had postdoctoral experience. Thus about 11% had doctoral preparation. In 2001, there were only 16 graduates from Canadian PhD programs in nursing, and 161 enrolled in these programs. By 2002, the number of doctoral students enrolled in nursing PhD programs had increased to 235, Alcock and Arthur, 2003, although it is not known if the same schools reported in these two different surveys. No information is available for the number of nurses in or graduating from non-nursing PhD programs. The fact that 125 tenured/permanent positions were filled in 2003 by the 66 reporting schools reflects the fact that many of these schools hired individuals who were either in doctoral programs or were committed to entering doctoral studies. That most schools were generally satisfied with the qualifications of the people recruited to fill the positions indicates a commitment to assisting their new recruits to complete their studies. However, this is expensive because schools have to protect the time of these doctoral candidates if they are going to succeed, which requires more faculty or puts more strain on the faculty members who take on more responsibilities. Nevertheless, the number of students in nursing doctoral programs is too low to meet the need and is a further constraint on expansion. Shaw, 2001, reported, with lament, that in the United States in 1995 to 2000, 50.2% of faculty members in baccalaureate and graduate programs had PhD/SA. She also notes that shortages of educationally prepared faculty will continue because of the reduction in the number of nurses and therefore, fewer numbers entering graduate school, the graying of the professorate, and of prepared nurses. Several schools noted in their response to this survey that the salaries and workload of faculty members were significant deterrents for individuals they sought to fill faculty positions. Building the Future, an integrated strategy for nursing human resources, page 66. Nursing education in Canada, historical review and current capacity. The results of searches for full-time and part-time faculty members to fill contract positions are positive. The schools filled all 264 available positions and seemed to fill the unfilled tenure/permanent positions with people on contract. completed master's degrees in nursing, or in a relevant area, were the preparations of choice for most schools. Next on the list were people with in-progress master's degrees. CNA/CASN data, 2004, revealed that in 2001, there were 281 graduates from master's programs in nursing, and another 1,542 enrolled. Given that the current survey reports results for only about half the RN nursing programs in Canada, and does not indicate the demand for master's-prepared nurses in clinical environments, clearly the number of master's-prepared nursing graduates is too few. It is remarkable that as many of these positions were filled as the results indicate. Fifty-five schools reported that they needed to recruit approximately 1,300 part-time contract teachers in 2003, and they managed to find 1,241 people to fill these positions. While a very few schools identified that a diploma in nursing was sufficient, most required at least a baccalaureate degree, and more than half were seeking if not a completed master's degree, then a master's in progress. More of those seeking nurses with master's preparation want the degree in nursing rather than in a relevant area. This demand for nurses with master's preparation in nursing combined with that identified in the previous paragraph indicates a huge demand for this level of preparation. Unfortunately, current enrollments in master's programs are not sufficient to meet this demand. The areas of faculty expertise that schools reported as being in shortest supply reflect most areas of clinical specialization. The one surprise was the few number of schools that identified gerontological nursing as an area of shortage. 6.1.4 Capacity to increase enrollment. In summary, schools have limited capacity to increase their enrollments. About 25% of schools could expand their current enrollments by 10% with their current resources, 20% could not expand even with additional resources, and 60% could expand if more financial resources were made available. As the proposed increases in enrollment get higher, fewer schools can manage them with their current resources. None of the reporting schools would be able to double its enrollment with current resources, but 20% could double enrollments if financial resources were made available to them. About 70% could increase enrollment by 25% with either current or additional resources, and 50% could increase their enrollment by 50% with current or additional financial resources. Therefore, there is very limited capacity within the education system to expand with current resources, but that capacity increases if financial resources are made available to schools. The resources in shortest supply are faculty, including backup faculty and faculty to supervise clinical experience and clinical placements in community and acute care facilities. Meanwhile, half the schools are stretched and stressed to support the numbers of students they currently enroll. Several question their ability to sustain the effort required for much longer. 6.1.5 Enrollment of Aboriginal students. A relatively small proportion of schools participating in this survey either set aside places for Aboriginal students or deliberately tried to recruit Aboriginal students. Numbers from this study were compared with those from the recent study Against the Odds by the National Task Force on Recruitment and Retention Strategies, NTFRRS, 2002. That study surveyed 64 universities/colleges in Canada, and of these, only 9 schools reported having designated seats, for a total of 35, and 16 of the participating. Building the Future, an integrated strategy for nursing human resources, page 67. Nursing education in Canada, historical review and current capacity. Universities/colleges reported that they had a total of 237 Aboriginal students enrolled. In contrast, this survey found 14 of 73 RN schools with reserved seats, 27 schools with Aboriginal students, and 433 students enrolled in 2003. It is likely that the 50% of RN programs that did not respond to this survey enroll at least some Aboriginal students, which would only augment the numbers. It is difficult to explain the difference in the numbers in the two studies, other than the fact that there were different schools involved. The good news is that the picture may be brighter than against the odds portrayed. However, given the need for nurses, many more Aboriginal students are required. What this earlier report makes painfully clear is the struggle these students go through to make it into nursing programs, and then to succeed in them. NTFRRS 2002, as captured in the following statement from the report. The title of the report, Against the Odds, was formulated after interviewing the Aboriginal nursing students and learning of their struggles to become registered nurses. Aboriginal nursing students face formidable challenges in completing post-secondary programs. Against these odds, men and women are pursuing their educational goals, drawing on the support of their families and communities, other Aboriginal students, their teachers, and available program infrastructure. They are strong and determined. They will succeed. Page 5. What is also clear is that students who make it into post-secondary education are already the success stories. The biggest challenge facing Aboriginal young people is getting through high school with the background needed to be successful in whatever career they choose to pursue. NTFRRS 2002. If schools of nursing in Canada accept the need for more nurses who are Aboriginal in origin, then the barriers and challenges facing these students must be confronted and eliminated. One of the challenges is the lack of role models, e.g., Aboriginal faculty members in schools of nursing. The NTFRRS report indicates that 13 schools that participated in the study had a total of 28 Aboriginal faculty members, most at an instructor level. The report describes this as a virtual absence of Aboriginal professorate, page 64. They found only 8 Aboriginal students in master's programs, so the paucity of Aboriginal professors is likely to continue. 6.2 Clinical Training Capacity and Models. The second major objective of the survey was to describe the clinical training capacity for nursing education, how that capacity is used, and the role that preceptors play in the education of student nurses. Regarding the adequacy of clinical resources, as discussed in the previous section, currently only 35% of 65 responding schools indicate that they have adequate community placements, 41% have adequate acute care placements, and 84% have adequate placements in long-term care facilities. Furthermore, there is limited capacity to expand. 19% of 62 responding schools that use community placements in their programs cannot find more clinical placements in the community to allow them to expand by even 10%. Similarly, 21% cannot find additional acute care spaces to accommodate a 10% expansion. These numbers increase to about 1/3 of schools indicating they have no capacity to increase community and acute care placements if a 25% expansion is suggested, to 2/3 of schools at the suggestion of a 50% expansion, and to about 80% of schools if doubling enrollment is suggested. Therefore, limits in the availability of community and acute care placements are two of the most constraining factors in schools' capacity to expand their enrollments. 1/3 even have difficulty meeting their current needs for students' clinical experience in the community and in acute care settings. Building the Future, an integrated strategy for nursing human resources, page 68. Nursing education in Canada, historical review and current capacity. Schools are offsetting these limitations by using non-traditional agencies and programs for placements. While creative, the examples provided by the schools are not able to offset the shortages, particularly in acute care. 6.2.1 Models of Clinical Practice. Two-thirds of schools of nursing use a distributive model of clinical placements for the first 2 years of their programs. In the 3rd and 4th years, a mix of distributed and block is more common. Few schools use block placements as the predominant model in any year. Schools select the approach they believe is academically superior, or the one that will maximize the use of their clinical resources. There is no evidence to support these claims. This is an area that has received little attention in nursing research. Cox, 2002, notes the predominance of distributed models of clinical education over block and describes the dissatisfaction expressed by the students in one baccalaureate school of nursing with this approach. Students complained about the difficulty preparing for both class and clinical practice in the same week. In response to this, the school developed a 2-by-2 approach, which they tested on fourth year. Students spent 2 weeks in class and 2 weeks in clinical practice over one semester. As a result of overwhelmingly positive responses from students, faculty, and clinical sites, the school adopted this approach to scheduling clinical practice for both semesters in the junior and senior years. In the early years of nursing programs, it may not be possible to place students in clinical areas for blocks of time because of the need to have students available to take other foundational courses. However, some schools do use a block versus a distributive approach. This presents an opportunity to compare the two approaches and to determine if there are advantages of one over the other in terms of student learning, student sense of integration into the clinical environment, stress levels, effect on the clinical environment and patients, faculty productivity, etc. Schools that prepare registered nurses are competing with each other, with schools that prepare other types of nurses, and with schools that prepare other types of healthcare practitioners. The number of schools competing for clinical experience for their students is staggering. The burden on agencies that have to coordinate all these placement requests is also staggering, and it may be so for patients who are exposed to several different types of learners at one time. These results demonstrate a preponderance of daytime, Monday through Friday, distributive clinical practice scheduling. In the face of shortages of clinical practice opportunities and intense competition for practice environments, it seems reasonable to test out other models, more block schedules, and more evening and weekend use of clinical sites. The latter two could introduce difficulties in terms of faculty availability or willingness to be available, and competition with students' employment. Nevertheless, there is a need to experiment to find efficiencies and ways of stretching the clinical resources that are available. As well, the use of simulations and laboratory-based clinical learning will need to increase if schools are to be able to increase enrollments. 6.2.2 Dependence on and availability of preceptors. Schools of nursing become increasingly dependent on the availability of preceptors as the students move to their upper years, and more individualized experiences are sought for them in highly specialized areas. Most schools do not have faculty with the breadth of expertise required to provide the clinical teaching and supervision that students require. Limiting students' experience to only those areas in which there is faculty expertise will produce neither qualified nor satisfied students. There is much literature that attests to the value of preceptors and how they enrich programs, Bain, 1996, as well as how Building the Future, an integrated strategy for nursing human resources, page 69. Nursing education in Canada, historical review and current capacity. They should be selected, prepared for the role, and nurtured in it. Dibert and Goldenberg, 1995, Heem, Kramer, Tack and Evans, 1986. Diploma programs are generally not dependent on preceptors from the community, while baccalaureate programs are. 2/3 of programs that are dependent on preceptors in the community find that there are sufficient numbers of preceptors available, all or most of the time. This level of availability is better than some perceptions of it. Acute care is not so different from community care in the dependence on preceptors, except there is greater dependence, particularly in the senior year of programs. However, programs find that preceptors in acute care are not as available as they are in community care. Few programs report that they can always depend on the availability of preceptors. The current nursing shortage, which is unlikely to improve in the short term, has much to do with the lack of availability of preceptors. This is exacerbated by the high proportion of new graduates on some units, who may not have sufficient experience or confidence to act as preceptors. The vast majority of nurses indicate that they are willing to serve as preceptors, and the nurse managers support this view. However, there simply may be more students than there are nurses with enough experience to meet the need. The types of rewards offered to nurses when they serve as preceptors are not likely to encourage those who are unwilling or ambivalent to accept the challenge. Dibbert and Goldenberg, 1995. Most rewards are in the form of plaques that recognize service or receptions. Few schools provide financial rewards, reduced or eliminated tuition, or other tangible forms of recognition like faculty appointments. The latter is a challenge because of the administrative work involved in making appointments and in tracking nurses because of their relatively high turnover rates. Clearly, nurses become preceptors because of the satisfaction they receive from it and because they feel a responsibility to give back. However, in the face of increasing clinical demands and limited staff resources, schools will have to find ways to make the role more attractive. Building the Future, an integrated strategy for nursing human resources, page 70. Nursing education in Canada, historical review and current capacity. 7. LPN education and capacity, survey findings. The overall response rate, 40%, was calculated on the basis of the total number of schools, 93, to which questionnaires were sent. 37 schools responded to the survey. Responses to the questionnaire were received from every region of Canada. Table 28 reports the number of responses received regionally. Table 28. Regional response rates to survey questionnaire. LPNs West/North Central Atlantic on QC. No schools 13 21 43 16. No received 9 11 11 6 response rate 69%, 52%, 26%, 38% note. 37 out of 93 schools responded. 7.1 Types of programs that prepare LPNs. In 2004, Canada had 93 schools that prepare students to become licensed/registered practical nurses. The term school requires explanation in the context of the education of LPNs. In the provinces of Quebec, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan, there is essentially only one program in each province, but it is provided differently in each province. In Manitoba and Saskatchewan, one college, i.e., one school, in each province administers the program but does so at a variety of sites and through a number of different arrangements. All students are counted as belonging to one school. Only one questionnaire was sent to each of these provinces. In Quebec, the program is provided in Centres de Formation Professionnels, CFP, administered through boards of education or in private colleges on behalf of the Ministry of Education. For this survey, each CFP was treated as a school and was sent a questionnaire, as was the private college. In New Brunswick, the program is administered through a number of sites of the New Brunswick Community College. Each site was treated as a school and was sent a questionnaire, as was each site that administers the program in Nova Scotia. In the other provinces and territories where the programs are located in community colleges and in British Columbia, also in private colleges, each college, i.e., school, that provided a program to prepare LPNs was sent a questionnaire and invited to participate. Schools reported on the source of their funding and whether it was permanent for a fixed number of students or contractual for a varying number of students. All 37 reporting schools are publicly funded, and one indicated that it had another source of funding in addition to this. 59% of 32 schools have permanent funding, 13% have contract funding, and 28% report other funding. One school listed slip year funding, several are funded on a per-student basis, one receives it in the form of cost recovery, one has provisional funding, and two reported being funded per student exam. Building the Future, an integrated strategy for nursing human resources, page 71. Nursing education in Canada, historical review and current capacity. Several schools offer their programs through brokered arrangements. This means that a group, such as a community college that does not have an LPN program but wishes to offer a program, usually for a predetermined period, will contract with an established school with an approved curriculum to offer the curriculum. 7 of the 37 reporting schools indicated that they had brokering arrangements. 3 of the 7 schools have 1 brokering arrangement each, 2 schools have 3 brokered arrangements each, 1 school has 5, and 1 has 10. Table 29 provides information on the number of sites through which schools offer their programs. More than 50% of the schools have only 1 site. Table 29. Number of sites per program. LPNs know of sites per program 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 12 know of programs. N equals 37, 21, 6, 0, 3, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1. The following summarizes how many temporary and permanent sites the schools have. Number of temporary and permanent sites. Permanent sites for schools have no permanent sites. 26 schools have only 1 permanent site. 3 schools have 2 permanent sites. 4 schools have 4 permanent sites. Temporary sites. 21 schools have no temporary sites. 16 have anywhere from 1 to 10 temporary sites, distributed as follows: 8 schools, 1 site 1 school, 4 sites 1 school, 2 sites 2 schools, 6 sites 3 schools, 3 sites 1 school, 10 sites. Table 30. Capacity at permanent and temporary sites. Student capacity. No schools with given range of students. No. Range 12 to 49, 50 to 96, 100 to 199, 200 to 750 permanent sites. N equals 32, 3,780, 12 to 734, 11, 12, 5 for temporary sites. N equals 17, 833, 6 to 180, 12 to 30. Note: schools were asked to provide information on the number of students they could manage in their programs. 43%, 16 of 37 schools, reported that they offered bridging programs that facilitated healthcare aides to become licensed/registered practical nurses. 72%, 26 of 36 schools that responded to this question, reported that they tracked their graduates after they had completed the program. Building the Future, an Integrated Strategy for Nursing Human Resources, page 72. Nursing Education in Canada, Historical Review and Current Capacity. Number of classroom and clinical practice hours. LPN schools report the length of their programs in classroom and clinical hours rather than in months or years. There is a wide range of hours, which vary depending largely on the province in which the programs are located. 35 schools responded to the question. The range and frequency of hours is reported in Table 31. Table 31. Hours of theory and practice in LPN programs. Theory and lab clinical practice hours. No schools. Percent. No schools. Percent 400 to 499. 13%. 13%. 500 to 599. 00%. 13%. 600 to 699 to 6%. 39%. 700 to 799. 6 17%. 4 11%. 800 to 899. 15 43%. 10 35%. 900 to 999, 823%, 823%, 1,000 to 1,200, 839%, 823%. Note: N equals 35. The majority of programs have theory and laboratory hours in the range of 700 to 999 hours, with the mode being in the 800 to 899 hour range. The most prevalent number of clinical practicum hours is in the 800 to 1,099 range, with the mode being in the 800 to 899 hour range. The range varies greatly, from schools with fewer than 500 hours of theory and of practice, to another with more than 1,150 hours of theory, and still another one with more than 1,200 hours of practice. 7.1.1 Number of classes admitted per year. Number of classes admitted per year, N equals 35. 1 class per year 57% admit 1 class per year. 1 class per year 8 schools admit more than 1 class per year as follows: 7 schools, 2 classes 3 schools, 6 to 7 classes 4 schools, 3 to 4 classes 1 school, 12 classes. 7.1.2 Maintenance of waiting lists. When schools have more applicants than they are able to admit, some maintain waiting lists. Of the 36 schools that responded, 68% maintain waiting lists. At the time of the survey, early 2004, there were 1,207 students on waiting lists. The lists ranged in number from 10 to 341 students per school. There is a wide range of practices related to waiting list management. One school has no time limit, and another allows students to remain on the waiting list until either they get into the program or cancel their application, and another allows them to remain on the waiting list until the next intake. 4 schools maintained waiting lists for a year, and 3 schools maintained them for 24 weeks. The average length of time students spent on these waiting lists ranged from 1 month to 4 years. Only 4 schools had students waiting more than a year, and in 7 programs, the average time spent on their waiting lists was 1 to 6 months. Building the Future, an integrated strategy for nursing human resources, page 73. Nursing education in Canada, historical review and current capacity. 7.2 Student admission and enrollment, LPNs. The first question to be answered was, what is the current capacity of schools that prepare licensed practical nurses? In order to determine the capacity of LPN programs and the stability of this capacity, the schools were asked for their current level of admissions, for the changes to these admission levels over the last 3 years, whether the target levels for admission had been met or exceeded, and about plans for expansion and contraction of admission levels for the next year. 7.2.1 Admissions 2002-2003. Schools were asked to compare their most recent admission numbers with those of the previous admission. Comparison of 2003 and 2002 admissions. 2003 admissions, N equals 37. 37 schools admitted a total of 1,957 full-time students and 127 part-time students. All schools admitted full-time students, ranging from 9 to 160 per school, with a mean of 54 and a median of 50 students. 9 schools admitted part-time students, ranging from 1 to 50 per school, with a mean of 14 students. The part-time admission distribution was bimodal. 5 schools admitted 5 or fewer part-time students, and 4 schools admitted 15 to 50 students. Comparison with 2002, N equals 35. 17 schools, 49%, reported an increase in admissions of a total of 251 students, ranging from 2 to 44 students, with a mean of 16 and a median of 14 students. 2 schools, 6%, reported a decrease of a total of 11 students. 15 schools, 43%, reported no change. This represents an overall increase of 240 students admitted to first year in 35 schools in 2003 as compared to 2002. 7.2.2 Gender profile of admitted students. A total of 33 schools reported the breakdown of men and women in their admission numbers. 3 schools admitted no men, and the rest admitted between 1 and 44 men in their classes for a total of 193. In contrast, these 33 schools admitted 1,620 women. Therefore, 12% of the admissions were men. 7.2.3 Admission targets. Schools were asked if they met their admission targets for the past 3 years, 2001 to 2003. In 2001, 31 schools reported, and of these, 58% met or exceeded their target admissions. In 2002, 63% of 32 schools met or exceeded targets, and in 2003, 47% of 32 schools did so. The schools were also asked to break down their admission targets and admissions into met, exceeded, and below target. Fewer schools responded to this question than to the previous one. Because the number of schools reporting in each year varied, the numbers are reported as percentages. Details are provided in Table 32. Building the Future, an Integrated Strategy for Nursing Human Resources, page 74. Nursing Education in Canada, Historical Review and Current Capacity. Table 32. Admission targets and success in meeting them, 2001 to 2003, LPNs year target exceeding target below target range total no. Percent range total no. Percent range total no. 2001, N equals 21, 12 to 299, 1,320, 30%, 1 to 42, 65, 35%, 4 to 21, 77, 2002, N equals 23, 20 to 423, 1,725, 18%, 2 to 62, 78, 36%, 2 to 1865, 2003, N equals 22, 12 to 642, 1,955, 43%, 1 to 23, 76, 33%, 1 to 419. Of the LPN schools that responded, all reported a steady increase since 2001 in the target number of students they are seeking to admit. Furthermore, while about a third of schools did not meet their target each year, the number of students below target is small and has decreased each year. While the number of schools that exceeded their target varied each year, the total number of students by which they exceeded was greater than the number below target, resulting in an overall gain. Admission plans. Schools were asked about their admission plans for 2004. Only 5 of 36 schools plan to increase their admissions, with increases of 3 to 40 students planned. If these targets are met, there will be a total increase of 95 students. 2 schools plan to decrease admissions, one by 12 and the other by 50 students, for a total of 62 students. The majority of schools, 28, do not plan to change. These numbers indicate that if targets were met, a very modest overall increase of 33 students would have been admitted to these 36 schools in 2004. Results admission plans for 2004, N equals 36, 78%, 28 schools plan no change. 14%, 5 schools plan to increase levels by 3 to 40 students, for a total of 95 students. 6%, 2 schools plan to decrease levels, one by 12 students and the other by 50 students for a total of 62 students. 7.2.4, Enrollment Targets. Schools were asked to report the total number of students enrolled in their programs in the 2003 calendar year. In total, 3,947 full-time students were enrolled by 36 schools, of which 453 students were in brokered programs, 1,003 part-time students were enrolled in total, 23 of them in brokered programs. Therefore, brokered programs are enrolling 12% of full-time and 2% of part-time students. Table 33. Total enrollment in October 2003 No of students No in brokered program percent. Full-time 3,947 453, 12%. Part-time 1,003 2%. Building the Future, an Integrated Strategy for Nursing Human Resources, page 75. Nursing Education in Canada, Historical Review and